Now don't get me wrong, 2023 will go down as one of the best years for video games. But it's not without some major stinkers and disappointments. And today, we are counting down those. So first thing is first, this is my opinion, and it's specifically games that I've played. So certain games like Crime Boss Rockay City, Wanted Dead, Avatar The Quest for Balance, and Walking Dead Destinies won't be on here. Also keep in mind that this is a list combining my worst of the year and my most disappointing games of the year. So some of the games on here aren't even really that bad, but they're rather disappointing. I wouldn't say I have enough games for a top 10 list of the worst games of the year, but I also wouldn't say I have enough games for a top 10 list of the most disappointing games of the year. So I'm combining them. Anyways, let's begin. Now before you do that, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell, leave a comment, or I will make you play the top 3 on this list.
I wanted to give to you, in the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
Oh boy, it really hurts to put Starfield on this list, but I kind of feel like it should be here. Now I want to make one thing clear, Starfield is certainly the best of all the games on this list, and it's the only one I'd actually say is somewhat worth playing, but it should have been so much better. Starfield has some great ideas, but they weren't executed very well. I think that's the main thing. I'll go down a few. I think the ability to fly through space is neat and all, and makes the game feel huge at first, but it really got old after a little while. Being able to roam around each planet, you know, I don't think the planets are as empty as people said they were, but at a certain point, you just want to go back to your ship, but then there's no map when you're on land. Because going from planet to planet takes actual real-time hours, you end up using a lot, and I mean a lot of fast travel. It's a lot of menus, and that's not fun, especially since this kind of defeats the purpose of exploration, and on top of that, the UI kind of sucks. Not to mention the game often just drops you right in, and I'm not saying it needs to hold your hand, but it gives you nothing a lot of the time. I can 100% understand why some of you would have Starfield as your #1 game of the year, and there is some genuine greatness to it, but I personally feel like it's just bogged down by issues that should not be there. Okay, I know I said that Starfield is kind of the only game on here that I'd actually say is good, but I'd actually say that when you can get into a game of Payday 3, it's actually a lot of fun. Emphasis on when you can get into a game, and even more emphasis on when. I wouldn't really say that Payday 3 is on this list, but rather the launch of Payday 3 and its servers, as it was an utter embarrassment. It wasn't buggy or glitchy, but it was inaccessible, which is arguably worse. I was able to get into matches, and when I did, Payday 3 was a very solid experience, but it felt like it was few and far between. The servers were absolute dog shit for like a week, and I know that they eventually fixed it, or at least they said they were going to. I didn't follow to see if they actually did, but either way, too little too late. That should honestly cause a game to be higher, because you couldn't really play it, but to be fair, the actual game when you could play it is a lot of fun, and also, I got the game for free on Game Pass, so I didn't feel ripped off. Not that that makes the launch okay, I'm just saying for me personally, Game Pass sort of softens the blow for me. But either way, Payday 3 is a rare case of a game that had a lot going for it, but any positive gets eclipsed if you can't even play it.
So I'm going to be giving this flavor 8.5 out of 10 scoops.
Metal Gear Solid is a game series that you won't hear too many people talking shit about. 5 games that most people who played them will tell you they are god tier status. So you take the first 3 Metal Gear Solid games, and as bonuses throw in the original 2 shitty Metal Gear games, and some extra cool bonus content. It's a recipe for success and greatness and no way to fuck it up. Konami fucked it up. Okay, I'm being a little facetious, as Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 isn't ungodly terrible, but it is ungodly lazy. Yeah, you get 3 of the greatest games of all time, and the NES games, but that's really it. I'm not saying they should have added more games, as especially since this is only Volume 1, I think this is a good way to start. But they should have done more than the bare minimum. Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 are taken right from their HD remasters on Xbox 360, and they don't even try to hide it. The title screen for each game, it says HD Edition. They couldn't even change that. And Metal Gear Solid 1 has horrible UI, runs at 30 FPS, and doesn't even give you a widescreen option. Sure, there are games that are more offensive or whatnot coming up, And there is a decent amount of value with getting Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3 alone, but the Metal Gear Solid franchise deserves so much better than this.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
You know, I don't remember too many people talking about Disney Illusion Island when it came out, but I was excited as it seemed to be a spiritual successor to the Illusion games, like the World of Illusion or Castle Illusion games on the Sega Genesis, which were really solid. Plus the addition of 4-player couch co-op and making it a Metroidvania I thought was intriguing, but after playing it, it's just not good. And I know this isn't a popular opinion, because everyone I've heard who played this game says they really liked it, and that's great. But for me personally, while it has the Disney charm and the visual style makes the game stand out in a great way, it was just a slog. For one, it's geared towards kids, but I wouldn't say a Metroidvania is the best kind of game for kids. That's not inherently a problem. I guess you could make a simple Metroidvania, but the thing is, Disney Illusion Island tries to meet in the middle by having a Metroidvania with like Metroidvania elements and level designs with nothing going on. The only thing that happens is that enemies will appear, and you just avoid them. You don't even attack them. There's no way to fight them. You can't even just jump on them like you could in most like platformers. You have to jump over them, or just avoid them entirely. That doesn't sound so bad, but in practice, it makes Disney Illusion Island feel all the more like a walking simulator. And I really don't like using that term to describe a game, but I think it's perfect here. I could totally get behind why someone would have fun with Disney Illusion Island. But for me, it's just one big nothing burger.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
I feel like Tales of Symphonia is an unsung hero of JRPGs. It's a fan favorite from the GameCube, and with the rise of nostalgia from that era, Tales of Symphonia seemed primed for a remaster or even full-blown remake to reach a new audience, and we got a remaster this year, but oh boy. The best way I can put Tales of Symphonia Remastered is to call it a very lazy and lifeless remaster. And if that was all that was wrong with this game, that would be disappointing, but not what puts it this high on the list. What is, however, is that the game honestly at times runs worse than it did on the fucking GameCube. And I don't just mean like, oh, it lags a bit or it stutters or whatever. No, even if we don't have the original to compare to, it still runs like shit. There also really isn't like anything that changed or like anything added that's worth a note. And on top of that, I'm also not quite the biggest fan of like the aesthetic of the game. In a way, it is an up-res version of the original game, but honestly, it really just looks cheap. Tales of Symphonia Remastered is definitely the worst release the fan favorite game has ever seen, which sucks because Tales of Symphonia deserves way better than a cheap and lazy cash grab.
Chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
You ever see a game and think to yourself, wow, that looks really strange and odd and bizarre and strange, but I want to play it? Oddly specific, but for me, that game was Atomic Heart. It looked really promising, being an alternate history take where the Soviet Union has a bunch of robots and tech that end up going rogue and a whole bunch of random and weird stuff happens. After playing it, however, and even after giving it a bit more of a mixed review, I gotta say now, it's just not a good game. I will say that the game looks stunning and has a killer soundtrack and also nails the trippiness and has an open world that I would want to go roam around in, but you can't do that because there are robots everywhere. At first, it's not so bad, but you just want to get from point A to point B at a certain point, and can't because these robots won't leave you alone. And on top of that, your main character is really fucking slow, and while there is an option to run, it's more akin to a jog, so it really slows the game down at times. Speaking of slow, dodging also sucks, and the story, while it's promising and I find alternate history stories intriguing, Atomic Heart's story is just not memorable. The boss fights were also just not fun and just frustrating, even though most of them took me like 2 tries tops to beat. The one boss that took me much longer to beat, I ended up beating him because, and I kid you not, the game glitched and the boss froze. I'm not kidding, I will never forget that. Needless to say, Atomic Heart isn't quite the sleeper hit I wanted it to be. Hey, wanna know a fun fact? When the Nintendo Switch first launched, the 3 big launch titles were 1-2-Switch, Super Bomberman R, and of course, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And this year, we got a sequel to Breath of the Wild with Tears of the Kingdom, a sequel to Super Bomberman R with Super Bomberman R2, and for whatever reason, a sequel to 1-2-Switch with Everybody 1-2-Switch. This game isn't quite as bad as much as it is confusing. Why did Nintendo make this? And from what we've heard before it was announced, why did they release it? 1-2-Switch was fine as a tech demo for the Switch, was massively overpriced for what it was, but it was fine, but nobody was asking for a sequel, especially since if it was just a tech demo, getting a sequel this point in the Switch's lifespan, what's the point? Half of Everybody 1-2-Switch is just more 1-2-Switch with more mini games or whatever, and it's just lame and boring and it doesn't feel like it's just like, why do we have this? But the other half, which is the main gimmick of the game, is being able to use your cell phone, allowing up to 100 players. That sounds cool at first, but then you play it and realize it's pretty much Kahoot with a bit more of a budget, and they charge $30. Once again, why did Nintendo even bother with this? And worst of all, I happened to make a video about 1-2-Switch back in January of this year, and in that video, my player 2, for the lulz, was a guy in a horse mask. I thought that would be funny. Then, fast forward to June of this year, Nintendo announced the sequel to 1-2-Switch, and who is front and center? That's right, a guy in the exact same horse mask. I'm expecting some royalties on that one, Nintendo. I mentioned Starfield earlier and how it was disappointing for the magnitude of the release and how it was nothing more than just good. But another reason it was only number 10 is because even though Starfield was rather disappointing and I have a lot of issues with it, I would play it every day for the rest of my life if that meant Microsoft never releases another game as bad as Redfall ever again. Redfall, this is the type of game that just has me astounded that it got past QA. It's a game where it's just bad at best and a downright catastrophe at worst. It is one of the most embarrassing AAA game releases perhaps within the past 10 years because this is an early access game disguised as a full release. Content? What content? Story? Okay, I didn't hate the story, but polish? What polish? It's a buggy and glitchy and ugly mess with horrible AI. Not to mention, if you play the game co-op, the host is the only one who makes progress in the story, not player 2. You know, it's just the host. What the fuck is that? And if that's not bad enough, Redfall is an open world game, and there's nothing. There's nothing in the open world. Playing an open world that is empty, like this, is like watching a comedy that isn't funny. It's rare that I'll ever say this about a game, but maybe Redfall should have never seen the light of day. It is about vampires after all. But seriously, Redfall is one of the poorest excuses for a AAA game I've seen in some time. And it's not even number 2.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
I just called Redfall one of the poorest excuses for a AAA game release I have ever seen. But if that's number 3, what does that make number 2? And what does that make number 1? Well, we're not at number 1 yet, but we are at number 2, so I'll reword that question. If Redfall is that pitiful, what does that make Lord of the Rings Gollum? What can I say about this game that hasn't already been said? When Redfall came out, it was embarrassing. When Gollum came out, it was a laughingstock and an absolute joke. What even is Lord of the Rings Gollum? Why did they make a Lord of the Rings game and have you play as fucking Gollum? This is like if they made a Spider-Man game, but instead of playing as Spider-Man, you play as a civilian. A good chunk of Lord of the Rings Gollum is just a boring chore fest, giving it quest design that kind of died out in like 2007, but it proudly presents it in this game. It's a case where even if the game was finished on a technical aspect, which, oh god, it is not, but even if it was, there's still so many things fundamentally wrong with it that maybe like Redfall, Gollum probably should have been left in the development hell it was in. Right down to its concept and premise to its actual performance and execution, Lord of the Rings Gollum is a hopeless game. I'm not gonna say too much more on this because I might have something cooking for it real soon, but long story short, stay away.
I'm a Luigi, #1.
You know, when Redfall came out, I never thought any game would come out this year and be worse, let alone 2 games. So with that, the fact that 1 game came out this year and is worse than Gollum, well shit, that game must suck some serious ass. And I'm gonna quit beating around the bush, because if you've been following shitty games this year, you should know that my #1 worst game of 2023 is Baldur's Gate 3. I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, Skull Island Rise of Kong. When I played this game, I kept asking myself 3 questions. Question 1, what am I looking at? Question 2, what am I playing? And question 3, why am I playing this? And, you know, I was never really able to answer any one of those questions. Have you ever joked around with your friends about, like, how glitchy and buggy a game can be, or how ugly it can look? Well, Skull Island Rise of Kong is like those jokes, but manifested into an actual game. This is a kind of bad game that we don't get too often. I can't find like a single redeeming quality that isn't ironic enjoyment. You can't tell me anyone behind this game looked at it and thought it was okay to release. Like, do you see this? I've done nothing to alter this. You are looking at an actual game that came out 2 months ago and retailed for like $50. As for playing the game, there is combat, but it's so generic and terrible and doesn't feel right at all. If I'm playing a King Kong game, I want to be able to rampage through everyone in my path. In Skull Island Rise of Kong, King Kong might as well just be some guy who's a bit strong. Not to mention, the game stutters a lot, there's often screen tearing, certain cutscenes are just screenshots, I'm not kidding, and I could say more, but like Gollum, I might have something cooking real soon for this one, but regardless, Skull Island Rise of Kong is my #1 worst game of 2023. Whew, those were some stinkers. If 2023 did not have as many great games as it did, we could look at this game as one of the worst years for gaming, because this top 3, like, holy shit. But that was my list. Obviously yours is gonna look a little different because, you know, you might have played different games than I did. What's maybe your worst or most disappointing game of the year? Don't worry, by the end of the year, by the end of the month, I'll have a list of my best games of the year. So don't you worry, it'll happen. Anyways, that'll be it for me. Be sure to like this video, come subscribe, or I will make you play the top 3 worst games on this list. Bye!